The sound of shattering glass cut through the low hum of conversation in the officers' club bar. Lily Brennan stood motionless behind the polished oak counter, shards of glass glittering against her apron as Budweiser pooled across the bar's worn surface. Her right hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the involuntary muscle memory that wanted to twist Corporal Dylan Garrett's index finger backward at a 90-degree angle until the small bones separated from their joints. She didn't do it. Instead, she kept her eyes down, shoulders curved inward, one knee slightly bent, the posture of submission, the posture of someone who didn't matter. Slow as a turtle, sweetheart. Dylan spun the empty glass on the counter, his voice pitched loud enough to carry across the 50-plus patrons scattered throughout Camp Pendleton's premier gathering space. 4 minutes to pour one beer. My Marines are dying of thirst over here. Lily's voice came out small, apologetic. Sorry, sir. Sir? Dylan's laugh was harsh, performative. I'm not an officer, but I am a Marine. He jabbed a thick finger at the eagle, globe, and anchor tattooed across his right forearm, then pointed at Lily. And you, civilian. From the corner booth, Sergeant Sapphire Vance looked up from her phone, a smirk spreading across her sharp features. 3 other Marines at her table glanced toward Lily with the casual disdain reserved for insects. One of them chuckled, a sound like gravel sliding down concrete. At the far end of the bar, old Otis gripped his whiskey glass with knuckles gone white. The 67-year-old Korean War veteran's jaw worked silently, but he said nothing. Nobody did. The Friday evening crowd continued their conversations, carefully avoiding eye contact with the unfolding scene. Dylan rose from his stool. At 6'3", with shoulders that barely fit through standard door frames, he carried the particular confidence of someone accustomed to physical dominance. The black USMC tattoo on his bicep flexed as he leaned across the bar, bringing his face to within 20 inches of Lily's. You know what? When I was in Helmand Province, the Afghan women serving tea moved faster than you. His breath smelled like cheap beer and entitlement, and they were scared for their lives. Lily didn't respond, didn't look up. Her stance remained slightly off-center, weight distributed unevenly, head tilted at an angle that suggested defeat, weak, unthreatening, forgettable. What Dylan couldn't see was the way her peripheral vision tracked every person in the room. What he didn't notice was how her breathing remained controlled, measured, even as her pulse stayed below 60 beats per minute. What he would never understand was that her apparent trembling came from restraint, not terror. 2 floors above them, Staff Sergeant Carl Weaver stood in the armory conducting his evening inventory check. If he had been present, he might have recognized Lily's posture for what it actually was. Tactical stance bravo, a position that allowed for explosive movement within 0.3 seconds, while appearing completely passive. Dylan extended his hand, palm up, fingers curling in demand. Beer, right now. Lily reached for a clean glass, her fingers still carrying that slight tremor. She angled her body away from him, the universal language of fear. Dylan turned to his table, voice rising with satisfaction. See that? Civilians scared of real warriors. What Dylan didn't see, the way Lily's eyes flicked to the mirror behind the bar, counting the 3 people at the corner table. What he didn't notice, the fractured glass on the floor reflecting the face of Private Ronan Hayes as the young Marine's thumbs moved rapidly across his phone screen, beneath the table, typing something urgent to someone unseen. What he was about to discover would rewrite everything he thought he knew about power, about strength, about who actually posed a threat in this room. But that revelation was still 23 minutes away. For now, Lily Brennan poured another beer, hands shaking just enough to sell the performance, while 47 witnesses watched a woman being humiliated and did absolutely nothing to stop it. The ambient noise of the bar continued, pool balls clacking in the corner, someone's laughter cutting through the hello music from the jukebox, the distant sound of a helicopter passing overhead on approach to the airfield. Dylan grabbed the fresh beer from Lily's hand before she could set it down, foam sloshing over the rim. He didn't say thank you. He turned his back on her like she'd already ceased to exist. The overhead lights hummed their 60-cycle drone. Someone fed quarters into the jukebox, and Bruce Springsteen's voice filled the space with promises of born to run, born to be free. The irony was lost on everyone except possibly Lily, whose expression remained carefully neutral as she wiped down the bar with slow, deliberate movements. At table 7, Corporal Chloe Kim watched the interaction with narrowed eyes, something stirring in her memory. She'd seen movements like that before, that particular economy of motion, but couldn't quite place where. The 24-year-old Marine frowned, took another sip of her Coke, and filed the observation away for later consideration. Near the entrance, Martha Price pushed through the door, her civilian clothes and the absence of any rank insignia marking her as one of the base psychologists. She scanned the room with practiced casualness before approaching the bar. When her eyes met Lily's, something passed between them, a communication so brief and subtle that anyone watching would have dismissed it as coincidence. "Coffee, please," Martha said, settling onto a stool 3 seats away from where Dylan had been sitting. "Black, no sugar." "Yes, ma'am." Lily's voice remained quiet, subservient, as she turned to the industrial coffee maker. The clock on the wall read 1900 hours. In military time, that made it 7 p.m. on a Friday evening in late August 2024, when the California heat still lingered, even as the sun dropped toward the Pacific. Outside, the sprawling expanse of Camp Pendleton stretched across 125,000 acres of Southern California coastline, home to over 38,000 Marines and their families. Inside this particular building, inside this particular bar, a much smaller drama was about to explode into something that would echo through every barracks, every briefing room, every chain of command on the entire installation. But first, there would be escalation. Dylan returned to the bar 7 minutes later, this time with Ronan Hayes in tow. The 22-year-old private looked nervous, his eyes darting between Dylan and Lily, like a dog uncertain of its master's mood. "Garrett says you've been working here 6 weeks, Ronan said, attempting to match Dylan's aggressive tone, but landing somewhere closer to petulant. "That true?" Lily nodded, still wiping down the already clean section of bar in front of her. 6 weeks, and you still can't pour a beer without making a mess." Dylan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Makes me wonder what you're actually good at, sweetheart." The endearment landed like a slap, which was precisely the intention. Sapphire laughed from her corner booth, the sound carrying clear across the room. 2 more Marines at her table joined in, encouraged by the pack mentality that turned individuals into something uglier than the sum of their parts. But before we see what happens next, if you're loving this story of hidden strength and justice, sash that like button right now. And here's the thing. We've got dozens of stories about underdogs who shocked everyone around them, people who were underestimated, dismissed, and written off, until the moment of truth arrived. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these satisfying moments of justice. Trust me, what's coming in the next few minutes will blow your mind. Dylan leaned against the bar, watching Lily with the focused intensity of a predator. "Tell you what, clean up that glass you broke, on your hands and knees, like a good girl." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Old Otis set down his whiskey with enough force that the glass cracked against the wooden bar. Still, he said nothing. The code of non-interference held firm, even as discomfort rippled through the witnessing crowd. Lily straightened slowly, meeting Dylan's eyes for the first time since the initial confrontation. For just a moment, something flickered in her gaze, something that made Ronan take an involuntary half-step backward. Then it was gone, replaced by the same passive resignation that had characterized her entire performance. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, reaching for the dustpan and brush kept beneath the bar. She moved around the counter's edge and knelt on the floor, methodically collecting the larger shards of glass first. Her movements were efficient, practiced, and to anyone with actual combat medical training, immediately recognizable as the specific technique taught to field medics for handling sharp debris in triage situations. The way she used the dustpan as a shield, the angle of her wrist that prevented any possibility of cutting tendons, the systematic pattern that ensured no fragment went uncollected. Old Otis saw it. His weathered face tightened, eyes narrowing as recognition sparked somewhere in his memory. At table 12, Master Sergeant Ivy Rodriguez had just walked in after finishing her shift at the base hospital. The 38-year-old combat medic ordered a beer from the secondary server, then turned to survey the room. Her gaze landed on Lily, still kneeling on the floor, and Ivy's entire body went rigid. She knew that technique. She'd taught that technique at combat medic school in San Antonio years ago, to a very specific class of students. Lily finished collecting the glass and rose to her feet in a single fluid motion, no hands on the floor for leverage, pure core strength bringing her vertical. Another small tell, another breadcrumb for anyone trained to see it. "Good dog," Dylan said, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. This time, the discomfort was palpable. Even Sapphire shifted in her seat. suddenly uncertain whether this had crossed from entertaining dominance display into something more problematic. Lily dumped the glass in the trash and returned to her position behind the sir, expression unchanged. She picked up a rag and resumed wiping down surfaces with mechanical precision. "Another round for my table," Dylan announced. "6 beers, and let's see if you can manage it without breaking something this time." As Lily began pulling beers, Dylan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his posture changed subtly. Tension crept into his shoulders. He typed a quick response, then looked up at Ronan with an expression that was no longer performative aggression, but actual concern. "Change of plans," he muttered, too low for anyone except Ronan to hear. "They moved the timeline up. Tonight at 0200 instead of Sunday." Ronan's face went pale. "Tonight? But we haven't finished the inventory adjustments." "Keep your voice down, you idiot." Dylan's whisper was vicious. "Just stick to the plan. Nobody's watching us." But someone was watching them. Lily's hands continued their steady work of pouring beer, but her eyes tracked the reflection in the mirror behind the beer. Watching both men's lips move, reading the conversation they thought was private, she committed every word to memory, adding it to the documentation that had been building for 42 days. 42 days of being called sweetheart and honey and girl instead of her name. 42 days of spillage blamed on her that came from patrons too drunk to hold a glass steady. 42 days of comments about her body, her competence, her worth. 42 days of the casual cruelty that men like Dylan inflicted on women they considered beneath notice. And beneath that cruelty, the real crime. 23 military weapons missing from the armory over the past 8 weeks. M4 carbines, M67 fragmentation grenades, night vision equipment, body armor, millions of dollars in military hardware disappearing into civilian black markets, where they'd be used to kill American soldiers or innocent civilians in countries most of these Marines had never heard of. Dylan Garrett wasn't just a bully, he was a criminal, and Lily Brennan had been sent here to prove it. She delivered the 6 beers to Dylan's table, enduring Sapphire's deliberate shoulder bump as she passed. The blonde sergeant smirked, secure in her social dominance. "Clumsy and slow," Sapphire announced to no one in particular. "Wonder how she even got hired." "Probably slept with the manager," one of the other Marines suggested, and the table erupted in laughter. Lily returned to the bar without response, without reaction, playing her role with the discipline of someone who'd spent 7 years in situations far more dangerous than a hostile crowd in a California bar. The door swung open again, and Staff Sergeant Jasper Rawlings strode in with the particular swagger of someone who considered themselves an expert in everything. The 31-year-old weapons instructor had a reputation for being technically proficient and socially insufferable. He spotted Dylan's table and altered course, dragging a chair over from an adjacent table. "Garrett, Hayes." He nodded to each in turn, then his eyes landed on Lily behind the bar. "Who's the new blood?" "Bartender," Dylan said dismissively. 6 weeks and still can't handle basic service." Jasper's laugh was sharp, calculated. "Let me guess. Another civilian hire who thinks working on base makes her special." He raised his voice, projecting toward the bar. "Hey, sweetheart, bet you don't even know what M4 stands for." Lily continued wiping glasses, giving no indication she'd heard him. "I'm talking to you," Jasper pressed, standing and approaching the bar, with the aggressive posture of someone used to students snapping to attention at his approach. "M4. Tell me what it means." The bar had gone quieter now, conversations dimming as more people tuned in to the unfolding confrontation. This was becoming entertainment, a break from the routine monotony of Friday evening drinks. Lily finally looked up, meeting Jasper's eyes with that same passive resignation. "I don't know, sir." "Sir." Jasper turned the word into mockery. "I'm a staff sergeant, not an officer. But you wouldn't know the difference, would you?" He leaned against the bar, warming to his subject. "M4 carbine, standard issue for the United States military. Gas-operated, magazine-fed, selective fire. Effective range of 500 meters. Probably the most common rifle you'd see on any base in America." He paused, smiling. "And you don't know a thing about it." "No, sir," Lily agreed quietly. "Pathetic." Jasper shook his head, glancing back at Dylan's table. "How do we let people like this onto our installations?" "She probably thinks a magazine is something you read." More laughter from the corner booth. Sapphire was recording now, phone held up to capture Lily's humiliation for whatever social media audience she cultivated. In military operations, communication technology can mean the difference between life and death. Modern encrypted communication devices use satellite networks and advanced signal processing to maintain contact even in hostile environments. These systems feature noise cancellation, location tracking, and secure data transmission, critical tools that special operations units rely on when operating behind enemy lines. The technology Lily used during her Delta Force missions was light years ahead of standard military issue. Through the window, the sun had fully set now, and the lights of the base created islands of illumination against the darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, weapons were being prepared for illegal transport. Somewhere in this room, the people responsible for that transport were growing increasingly confident that their operation remained undetected. Lieutenant Logan Pierce entered at 1920 hours, his officer's uniform crisp despite the late hour. The 29-year-old had the bearing of someone born to authority, chin perpetually raised, eyes constantly evaluating who belonged and who didn't. He surveyed the bar with obvious distaste, his gaze lingering on the civilian contractors and family members scattered among the military personnel. His attention settled on Lily, and his expression soured further. "Since when do we allow civilians behind the bar?" he asked Dylan, voice carrying that particular officer's projection that expected immediate attention. 6 weeks, apparently," Dylan replied, pleased to have a higher rank validate his harassment. "Been complaining about her since day one." Pierce approached the bar with the deliberate stride of someone conducting an inspection. "You, civilian, what's your name?" "Lily Brennan, sir." She kept her eyes down, shoulders curved inward. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Lily raised her eyes, and Pierce studied her face with undisguised contempt. "You're aware this is a military installation," he said, "that the people you're serving have earned the right to be here through sacrifice and service." "Yes, sir." "And you're aware that as a civilian, you're here by our courtesy, subject to our rules, and expected to maintain standards befitting this environment." "Yes, sir." "Then explain to me why I'm hearing complaints about slow service, broken glasses, and generally incompetent behavior." Pierce's voice had risen, drawing attention from every corner of the room. "Explain to me why we're tolerating substandard performance from someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to work among warriors." The word landed like he'd intended, drawing a clear line between warriors and everyone else. In his worldview, there were fighters and there were others, and women who poured drinks definitively fell into the second category. Lily's response was barely audible. "I apologize, sir. I'll do better." "You'll do better." Pierce repeated it with acid sarcasm. "That's your response? No explanation, no accountability, just vague promises of improvement? What would you like me to say, sir?" The question, delivered with perfect submission, somehow made Pierce even angrier. He clearly wanted resistance, wanted an excuse to escalate further. "I'd like you to demonstrate basic competence," he snapped. "Since that seems beyond your capabilities, perhaps you should consider whether this position is appropriate for someone of your limited skill set." Across the room, Martha Price set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Her face remained neutral, but her fingers drummed once against the counter, a tiny tell visible only to someone specifically watching for it. Old Otis had abandoned any pretense of drinking, his whiskey sitting forgotten as he watched the scene unfold with mounting tension in his weathered features. Ivy Rodriguez had moved closer, taking a seat at the bar 3 stools down from Martha, positioning herself with the careful casualness of someone preparing for potential escalation. Corporal Chloe Kim stood abruptly from her table, then sat back down just as quickly, torn between intervention and the knowledge that challenging a lieutenant would have immediate career consequences. The room had divided itself into invisible camps, those who found the confrontation entertaining, those who felt uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene, and a smaller group who were beginning to sense that something about this entire situation felt wrong. Dylan, emboldened by Pierce's presence, rejoined the conversation. "Lieutenant's right. Maybe this isn't the place for someone like you." He grabbed his M4 from where it leaned against the wall, the rifle technically unloaded but still projecting menace through its mere presence. "Tell you what, let's do a little test." Jasper's eyes lit up, sensing opportunity for his particular brand of technical humiliation. "Oh, this'll be good." Dylan laid the M4 on the bar, metal against wood, the black composite stock gleaming under the overhead lights. "This is a weapons system, the tool that Marines like me use to defend this country." He tapped the barrel. "I bet you can't even figure out how to field strip it." "Field strip?" Lily's voice carried just the right note of confusion. Take it apart, civilian. Dylan's smile was cruel. Basic weapons maintenance. Something every Marine knows inside and out. I'm guessing someone like you wouldn't know where to start. The trap was obvious to anyone with tactical training. Dylan was creating a no-win situation. If Lily refused, she confirmed her incompetence. If she succeeded, she revealed knowledge that no civilian bartender should possess. But the trap's obviousness only mattered if you recognized it as such. And everyone in the room, except for a very small number of people, believed Lily Brennan was exactly what she appeared to be, an overmatched civilian drowning in an environment she didn't understand. I don't think I should touch military equipment, sir, Lily said, still playing her role with perfect discipline. I'm giving you permission, Dylan countered. Direct order from a United States Marine, unless you are too scared to even try. The challenge hung in the air, heavy with masculine aggression and the pack mentality that fed on perceived weakness. Lily hesitated, a perfect performance of uncertainty. Her hand moved toward the rifle, then withdrew, moved forward again. The crowd leaned in, anticipating failure, eager for the spectacle, and then her fingers touched the weapon. What happened next occurred in 18 seconds. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, each motion flowing into the next without pause or hesitation. Press the rear takedown pin, pull the charging handle, inspect the chamber, remove the bolt carrier group, separate the charging handle, extract the firing pin, remove the bolt from the carrier. The disassembly was textbook perfect, executed with the unconscious competence of someone who'd performed the task thousands of times. But more than that, it was fast. Instructor-level fast. Competition-level fast. Lily laid out each component in proper sequence, then reversed the process with the same flowing efficiency. Bolt into carrier, firing pin inserted and rotated, charging handle replaced, bolt carrier group returned to upper receiver, takedown pin secured, charging handle pulled and released to verify function. 18 seconds from start to finish. The bar had gone absolutely silent. Jasper's face had drained of color, his mouth slightly open. He knew weapon manipulation times. He taught weapon manipulation times. His best students took 25 seconds. His instructor colleagues averaged 22. 18 seconds was the kind of time posted by people who lived and breathed weapon systems, who had spent years in special operations units where a second's delay meant the difference between survival and death. Dylan had gone rigid, the rifle in his hands, but his brain refusing to process what he'd just witnessed. You must have practiced? Beforehand. Someone showed you. But even as he said it, he knew it was nonsense. You couldn't fake that kind of muscle memory. That level of proficiency came from repetition measured in thousands of iterations, from training so intensive it became instinct. Pierce stared at Lily with something approaching shock, his earlier contempt replaced by confused suspicion. Lily had already returned to her passive stance, shoulders curved, head slightly bowed. Was that correct, sir? I just did what felt natural. What felt natural, Jasper repeated, his voice strange. That was instructor-level speed. I'm sorry if I did something wrong. Lily's voice remained small, submissive, even as the fundamental reality of the situation began shifting in ways none of them quite understood yet. Old Otis slowly released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Across his weathered face, something like satisfaction flickered and disappeared. Ivy Rodriguez caught Martha Price's eye, and the two women exchanged a glance of perfect understanding. Chloe Kim sat forward, recognition finally clicking into place. She'd seen that technique before, that specific method of weapons handling, at advanced infantry training, demonstrated by a female instructor whose name she couldn't quite remember, but whose competence had been absolutely undeniable. And in the corner, Private Ronan Hayes' phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, and his face went white. Whatever he read there made him look at Lily Brennan with sudden, visceral fear. The first crack had appeared in the carefully constructed facade, but there were still 47 minutes until the full truth would detonate like a fragmentation grenade in the middle of this crowded bar. Dylan grabbed the M4 back, inspecting it as if looking for evidence of deception. Lucky, he muttered, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Just got lucky. Luck doesn't produce 18-second field strip times, Jasper said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. He was running calculations, comparing what he had just witnessed against every baseline metric in his mental database. Nothing computed, Sapphire had stopped recording, lowering her phone with an uncertain expression. The entertainment value had suddenly become complicated by something she couldn't quite identify. Pierce recovered first, defaulting to authority when confronted with cognitive dissonance. Regardless of whatever that was, basic competence with a weapon system doesn't change your civilian status or excuse your performance deficiencies in your actual job. But his voice lacked the earlier certainty, and everyone heard it. The door swung open again, and Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Brennan entered the officers' club with the casual authority of someone who belonged absolutely everywhere on this installation. At 45, he carried himself with the particular confidence of a Marine who had spent 2 decades earning his place in rooms most people never knew existed. His CID investigator credentials weren't visible, tucked into the wallet in his jacket pocket, but his bearing communicated law enforcement even without verbal identification. He surveyed the room with practiced casualness, his gaze passing over Lily without the slightest hint of recognition. Crossed to the bar. Took a seat 4 stools down from Martha Price, carefully positioning himself to observe the entire space in the mirror behind the bar. "Whiskey," he said to Lily, voice neutral. "Neat." "Yes, sir." Lily poured the drink without looking at him, the physical distance between them belying the relationship only 3 people in this room knew existed. Brother and sister, investigator and operative, 2 parts of a larger operation that had been running for 6 weeks and was now approaching its critical phase. Dylan watched the interaction, still unsettled by the weapons demonstration, looking for any sign that might explain what he'd just witnessed. But Ethan showed no special interest in the bartender, and Lily showed no special deference to the customer, just another transaction in a long evening of transactions. "Garrett," Pierce's voice cut through Dylan's distraction. "A word. Outside." The 2 men moved toward the door, but not before Dylan leaned close to Lily and muttered, "I'll be watching you. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight." The threat was specific enough to be concerning, vague enough to maintain plausible deniability. Classic intimidation from someone who had probably practiced the technique on subordinates he could abuse without consequence. After they left, the ambient noise of the bar slowly returned to normal levels. Conversations resumed. Pool balls clacked. The jukebox cycled to a new song, but the tension remained, a frequency just below normal hearing that set teeth on edge and kept adrenaline simmering. Jasper remained at the bar, studying Lily with the focus of someone trying to solve a complex equation. "Where'd you learn to handle a rifle like that?" "I don't know, sir," Lily replied, still maintaining her character. "Like I said, I just did what felt natural." "Nothing about that was natural. Natural is fumbling with takedown pins and struggling to separate components. Natural is taking 2 minutes minimum for someone who's never handled the platform." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You've had training. Serious training, and I want to know where." But before Lily could respond, Sapphire reappeared at the bar, her earlier amusement replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Girls don't field strip rifles in 18 seconds, she said bluntly, "not without serious military training. So, either you're lying about who you are, or you're hiding something. And I don't like liars." The confrontation had shifted. What began as casual cruelty had evolved into something more dangerous. Genuine suspicion from people who had every reason to want to expose any infiltrator threatening their operation. Because that's what Lily represented, even if they didn't consciously know it yet. A threat, an unknown variable, something that didn't fit the expected pattern and therefore needed to be identified, controlled, or eliminated. Lily met Sapphire's gaze with carefully calibrated submission. "I'm not hiding anything, ma'am. I'm just a bartender trying to do my job." "Then explain the rifle." "I can't explain it. Maybe I got lucky like Corporal Garrett said. Nobody gets that lucky." Sapphire's voice had risen, drawing attention again from nearby tables. "You're lying, and when people lie to me, I make it my business to find out why." The social dominance display had transformed into genuine aggression, the queen bee sensing a rival and moving to eliminate the threat before it could fully materialize. Ethan shifted slightly on his stool, adjusting his position fractionally. "Ready." Martha's fingers drummed that subtle pattern again on the bar surface, waiting. Old Otis had abandoned all pretense now, watching the confrontation with intense focus, his old soldier's instincts recognizing the pre-combat tension in the air. And Lily Brennan, bartender, civilian, nobody special, met Sapphire's challenge with the same passive expression she'd maintained for 6 weeks. "I don't know what you want me to say, ma'am. I want the truth. I've told you the truth. I'm just a bartender. Then prove it. Sapphire's smile was sharp, triumphant. Dylan's got friends in base security. I'm having them run your background, full database search. And when it comes back showing exactly who you really are, you're going to wish you'd been honest from the start. The threat was real, specific, and potentially catastrophic to the operation. If Sapphire actually initiated a comprehensive background check through official channels, there was a chance, however small, that it might pierce the cover identity that had been constructed for this mission. For the first time all evening, genuine calculation flickered across Lily's features before she could suppress it. The micro-expression lasted perhaps a tenth of a second, but Sapphire caught it, and her smile widened. There it is. That's not the face of someone innocent. From across the room, Dylan and Pierce returned, and Dylan's expression suggested the conversation outside had not gone well. He approached the bar with renewed aggression, all his earlier uncertainty crystallizing into focused hostility. Sapphire's right, he announced. Something's wrong here, and I'm going to figure out what it is. He reached across the bar, faster than anyone anticipated, and grabbed Lily's arm. Not hard enough to leave marks, but firm enough to control, to demonstrate physical dominance, to re-establish the hierarchy he felt slipping away. Let go, Lily said quietly. Make me, sweetheart. The room went tense again, everyone sensing that this had crossed from harassment into something more dangerous. Ethan's hand moved to his jacket, not quite reaching inside, but the motion carried unmistakable implication. Martha set down her coffee cup with a sharp click against the counter. Old Otis stood up, age and frailty forgotten in the surge of righteous anger. But it was Chloe Kim who actually moved, stepping forward from her table. Corporal Garrett, let her go. Dylan glanced back, surprised. This doesn't concern you, Kim. I'm making it my concern. Let her go. The 24-year-old corporal's voice carried more authority than her rank should have allowed, but there was something in her bearing, some certainty beyond her years, that made Dylan hesitate. Since when do you give me orders? Since you decided to physically assault civilian personnel? Chloe's hand had moved to her phone. Want me to call the MPs and file a formal complaint? Because I've got about 40 witnesses who just watched you grab her. The calculation was visible on Dylan's face. Continue the aggression and face potential disciplinary action, or back down and look weak in front of his peers. The classic bully's dilemma. He released Lily's arm but leaned close to her face. This isn't over. Whatever you're hiding, I'm going to expose it. And when I do, you're going to regret ever setting foot on this base. Then he turned and stormed out, Ronan scrambling to follow, leaving Sapphire and Jasper staring after him with uncertain expressions. Pierce lingered a moment longer, his officer's assessment clearly running scenarios, calculating risks, evaluating what he'd witnessed. Miss Brennan, he said formally, I'll be filing a report with base security. Expect questions. Then he too departed, leaving Lily standing behind the bar with her arm bearing the red impression of Dylan's fingers. Her breathing slightly elevated for the first time all evening, her cover identity intact but significantly compromised. The bar erupted in low conversation, everyone processing what they'd witnessed, forming opinions, choosing sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand. Chloe approached the bar, concern evident in her expression. You okay? I'm fine, Corporal. Thank you for intervening. That weapons demonstration, Chloe's voice dropped to barely audible. I've only seen speed like that once before. Advanced infantry training, female instructor. She taught us things most Marines never learn. A pause. Her name was Brennan, too. Different first name, but same presence. Lily met the younger Marine's eyes and saw recognition there, incomplete but growing, like morning light revealing a landscape previously hidden by darkness. Coincidence, Lily said softly. Maybe. Chloe didn't look convinced. But if you need help, if you're in trouble, some of us aren't like Garrett and his crew. Some of us actually believe in the values we're supposed to represent. I appreciate that. Chloe nodded and returned to her table, but she kept glancing back at Lily with an expression that suggested wheels turning, connections being made, a puzzle assembling itself piece by piece in her military-trained mind. Ethan drained his whiskey and stood to leave, but not before catching Lily's reflection in the mirror. His eyes held a question. Abort or continue? The operation was compromised but not destroyed. They still had time, but it was running out faster than anticipated. Lily's response was nearly invisible, a slight adjustment of her left hand that in the specialized sign language they'd developed over years of covert work together meant, Continue to endgame. I'm ready. Ethan's nod was equally subtle, then he was gone, disappearing into the California night to coordinate the final phase of their operation. The clock showed 2100 hours, 9 p.m. In 5 hours, at 0200, Dillon's and his accomplices would attempt to move their stolen weapons off the base. In less than 3 hours, the truth about Lily Brennan would detonate in this very room, reshaping everyone's understanding of power, of strength, of what actually constituted a threat. But first, there would be more breadcrumbs, more reveals, more carefully orchestrated steps toward the inevitable moment when every assumption would shatter like the glass Dillon had smashed at the beginning of this evening. Lily resumed her bartending duties, pouring drinks, wiping surfaces, maintaining the facade even as the foundation beneath it grew increasingly unstable. She could feel the attention on her now, the whispered speculation, the uncertain glances from people trying to reconcile what they'd seen with what they believed. If you're on the edge of your seat, wondering what Lily will do next, go ahead and hit that like button. We're approaching the moment where everything changes. And if you want more stories of people who refuse to stay silent when pushed too far, subscribe now. The revelation is coming. Many military veterans struggle with financial planning after service. Specialized investment advisory services designed for former service members offer portfolio management, retirement planning, and benefits optimization. These programs understand military pension structures, VA benefits, and how to maximize disability compensation investments. With proper financial guidance, veterans can transform their service benefits into long-term wealth, something Lily had set up years ago, ensuring her undercover work wouldn't compromise her financial security. At 2200 hours, the bar began to empty as Marines drifted back to barracks or family housing. The crowd thinned from 50-plus down to perhaps 20 diehards who valued the camaraderie of late-night drinking over the wisdom of early rest. Sapphire hadn't left. She occupied her corner booth like a fortress, phone pressed to her ear, having multiple conversations with various contacts. Every few minutes she'd glance at Lily with calculating speculation, clearly working her network to uncover whatever secrets she was convinced existed. Jasper had moved to the bar itself, nursing a beer while continuing to dissect every aspect of Lily's weapons handling, with the obsessive focus of someone who'd built his entire identity around technical expertise, and was now confronted with evidence that his expertise might be less absolute than he'd believed. "I've been thinking about your technique," he said, not really asking for permission to share his thoughts. "The way you rotated the firing pin for removal. That's not standard instruction. That's advanced armorer-level knowledge. Where'd you learn that specific method?" Lily shrugged, still playing her role. "I don't know, sir. Is there more than one way to do it?" "Yes, there are multiple approaches, but the one you used is specifically taught at Special Operations weapons courses. Not regular Marine infantry training, not even standard armorer qualification. Special Operations." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from his posture. "So I ask again, where did you learn that technique?" Before Lily could respond, the door opened and Carl Weaver descended from the armory, his evening inventory check complete. The 33-year-old staff sergeant carried a tablet, his expression troubled as he crossed directly to the bar. "Lily, I need to—" He stopped, finally registering the attention focused on her, the tension in the room. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sir," Lily replied. "Just finishing up my shift." But Carl's instincts, honed by a decade of handling sensitive military equipment, told him that nothing was precisely the wrong word for whatever he'd walked into. He glanced around the room, noting the remaining personnel, cataloging faces and body language with the professional awareness of someone responsible for tracking weapons that could kill hundreds if misused. "Jasper, what happened here?" The weapons instructor's smile was humorless. "Our bartender friend demonstrated field strip proficiency that raises some interesting questions about her background." Carl's eyes sharpened, flicking to Lily with new assessment. "Field strip? What platform?" "M4. 18 seconds. Instructor-level technique including advanced armorer rotation on firing pin removal." A long silence. Carl set his tablet on the bar, his mind clearly running calculations. And when he looked at Lily again, his expression had shifted from casual acknowledgement to focused scrutiny. 18 seconds, he repeated. "You're certain? I timed it myself. Watched the whole thing." Carl stepped behind the bar, ignoring protocol, getting close enough to study Lily's hands. "May I?" She extended her right hand, and he examined it with clinical precision. Calluses in specific locations, scarring consistent with slide cuts from semi-automatic weapons. The particular muscle development in thumb and forefinger that came from thousands of magazine reloads. "These aren't bartender hands," Carl said quietly. "These are operator hands." And there it was, the second major crack in the facade, this one from someone with actual authority and expertise to make the accusation stick. Lily withdrew her hand, maintaining her submissive posture. I do a lot of cleaning, sir. Scrubbing, lifting. It's hard work. Don't insult my intelligence." Carl's voice remained quiet, but carried absolute conviction. "I know what warrior hands look like. I've been examining them for a decade, and yours belong to someone who's spent significant time with weapons systems." From her corner booth, Sapphire had stopped talking on her phone, her attention now fully focused on the unfolding confrontation. This was the evidence she'd been hunting for, validation of her instincts, proof that Lily Brennan was something other than what she claimed. Jasper had stood as well, positioned to block the exit, whether consciously or unconsciously creating a barrier to departure. "Who are you really?" Carl asked. Not angry, but genuinely curious, the question of someone confronting a puzzle that defied easy solution. And in that moment, Lily Brennan made a decision. Not to reveal everything, not yet, but to drop one more breadcrumb, to accelerate the timeline slightly because the walls were closing in and the mission required precision timing that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. She met Carl's eyes with an expression that was no longer entirely submissive. "I'm exactly who I claim to be, Staff Sergeant Weaver, a bartender, someone doing a job," she paused. "But that doesn't mean I haven't done other jobs in the past." "What other jobs?" "The kind that teach you to field strip a rifle in 18 seconds. The admission hung in the air, simultaneously revealing and concealing, answering nothing while suggesting everything. Carl nodded slowly, processing. "Military." "Maybe." "Which branch?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. It matters to everyone on this installation who's wondering whether you're a security risk." Lily's laugh was short, humorless. "A security risk. That's an interesting assessment given the actual security risks walking around this base." The statement was oblique enough to maintain deniability, but specific enough to suggest knowledge beyond what a civilian bartender should possess. Carl caught the implication immediately. "What do you know?" "I know that armory inventory doesn't balance. I know weapons have gone missing. I know people are nervous about something scheduled for tonight." Lily's voice had dropped, her posture subtly shifting, the submissive curve of her shoulders straightening fractionally. "And I know that maybe, just maybe, the real security risk isn't the bartender who can handle a rifle." Sapphire erupted from her booth, crossing the room with aggressive speed. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." "You're accusing Marines of theft? Of treason?" Sapphire's face had flushed with anger. "That's the most ridiculous—" "I didn't accuse anyone of anything," Lily interrupted, her voice still quiet but no longer submissive. "I made an observation about inventory discrepancies and scheduling concerns. If you interpreted that as an accusation, perhaps that says more about your guilty conscience than my actual words." The shift was subtle but undeniable. For the first time all evening, Lily Brennan had stopped playing defense and started pushing back. Not with aggression, but with the calm certainty of someone who held cards the other players hadn't yet seen. Jasper had moved closer as well, forming a loose triangle with Sapphire and Carl, unconsciously creating a physical barrier around Lily. "You need to explain yourself, right now." "I need to do nothing except my job, which is pouring drinks for Marines who have earned the privilege of being served. If you have questions about base security, I suggest you direct them to base security. I'm just a bartender." But nobody in the room believed that anymore. The mask hadn't fully fallen, but it had slipped enough that the face beneath was beginning to show through. And what showed wasn't fear or incompetence, but calculation, composure, and a confidence that belonged to someone accustomed to far more dangerous situations than a confrontation in a California bar. Old Otis chose that moment to interject, his weathered voice cutting through the tension. "You young people think you invented everything. Combat, courage, deception." He finished his whiskey, set the glass down with deliberate care. "But there's nothing new under the sun, just the same patterns repeating with different faces." He looked directly at Lily. "I've seen operators before, real ones. The kind who don't advertise because the work doesn't leave room for ego. His gaze shifted to encompass Sapphire and Jasper. "And I've seen bullies before, the kind who mistake cruelty for strength and volume for authority." The old veteran stood, dropping bills on the counter to cover his tab. "I don't know this woman's full story, but I know which of you carries themselves like a warrior, and it ain't the ones doing the yelling." He departed without waiting for response, leaving behind the particular silence that follows when an elder speaks truth nobody wants to acknowledge. Martha Price closed her laptop and stood as well. "Lily, walk me to my car." It wasn't really a request, and Lily recognized the exit opportunity being offered. "Of course, ma'am," but Sapphire blocked the path. "She's not going anywhere until we get answers." "You have no authority to detain civilian personnel," Martha replied, with the calm certainty of someone who'd spent years navigating military bureaucracy. "And unless you were prepared to formally charge her with something specific, I suggest you step aside." "Who are you?" "Dr. Martha Price, base psychologist. I've worked with PTSD cases, sexual assault victims, and disciplinary review boards. I know military law, and I know your threats constitute harassment of civilian staff. Now, step aside, or I'll be filing a very detailed complaint with your commanding officer first thing Monday morning." The triangle broke apart, not because of the threat, but because the legal ground had shifted beneath them. Whatever suspicions they harbored, formal detention required evidence and authority they didn't currently possess. Lily followed Martha toward the exit, acutely aware of the eyes tracking their departure, the whispered speculations already beginning, the narrative being constructed to explain everything they'd witnessed. Outside, the California night was clear and cool, stars visible despite the light pollution from the base. Martha's car was parked 50 yards away, far enough to allow for brief private conversation. "Status?" Martha asked quietly once they were clear of potential audio surveillance. "Compromised but functional. Dylan moved the timeline up. 0200 tonight instead of Sunday. Ethan knows. We proceed as planned." The weapons demonstration was risky. Dylan forced the play. Refusing would have been more suspicious than demonstrating competence. Lily glanced back at the bar. "Sapphire's running background checks. How thorough is the cover?" "Thorough enough to survive standard database queries, but if she gets someone with actual investigation credentials involved, it might crack. We're racing the clock now." "We always were." Lily's smile was grim. "How many hours until extraction?" 3 hours until the weapons move. 4 hours until Colonel Webb is briefed and ready to execute. Can you maintain cover that long?" "I've maintained it for 6 weeks. 3 more hours is nothing." But even as she said it, both women knew that the equation had changed. When everyone believes you're nobody, maintaining a cover is simple. When people start suspecting you're somebody, every action becomes scrutinized, every word analyzed, every movement evaluated for inconsistencies. "Your brother's positioned at the north gate," Martha continued. "Carl's inventory data confirms 23 weapons missing, patterns consistent with Garrett's duty roster. We have probable cause. We just need to catch them in the act. They'll come through the bar's delivery entrance. 2:30 a.m. loading window when security changeover creates a 6-minute gap in surveillance coverage. Ronan will drive, Dylan will handle the cargo, and there's a third player we haven't identified yet. Pierce? Maybe, or someone higher. The operation's too smooth for just 2 enlisted men." Lily's expression hardened. "Either way, they'll be coming through soon, and when they do, we'll be ready." Martha nodded and climbed into her car. 3 hours, Brennan. Don't get heroic before then." "Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am." The psychologist drove away, leaving Lily standing in the parking lot, taking a moment to drop the facade completely. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the tension release from muscles that had been held in submissive postures for hours. Flexed her hands, shaking out the artificial tremor she'd maintained to sell fear. Straightened her spine to its full height, adding the 3 inches that proper military bearing provided. For 60 seconds, in the darkness between streetlights, Lily Brennan allowed herself to be exactly who she was. Captain Lily Brennan, Delta Force, Ghost Unit 7, 3 Purple Hearts earned in Fallujah and Kandahar, Silver Star for actions in Syria, that would remain classified until long after everyone involved was dead. Then she curved her shoulders again, adopted the submissive posture, and walked back into the officers' club bar to complete her mission. Inside, the remaining patrons had coalesced into 2 distinct groups. Those who believed Lily was exactly what she claimed, despite evidence suggesting otherwise, and those who were convinced she was some kind of infiltrator, but couldn't quite articulate what she might be infiltrating or why. Sapphire had relocated to a position directly in Lily's line of sight. Phone still active, clearly coordinating with someone off-site. Every few minutes she'd look at Lily and mouth words like soon and we'll see. Jasper and Carl had engaged in intense discussion at the far end of the bar, their body language suggesting disagreement. Jasper appeared to be arguing for immediate action, while Carl seemed to be counseling patience and following proper channels. Chloe, Kim, remained at her table, but she'd been joined by 3 other female Marines, and their collective attention kept drifting toward Lily with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something approaching hope. The clock read 2300 hours, 11 p.m., 3 hours until the weapons transfer, 2 hours and 17 minutes until everything Lily had carefully constructed would be either validated or destroyed. She resumed her position behind the bar and began the methodical process of closing procedures, washing glasses, wiping surfaces, counting the till, completing all the mundane tasks that civilian bartenders performed at the end of their shifts. Except Lily Brennan wasn't counting money. She was counting exits, evaluating sightlines, calculating response times, running scenarios through her mind with the tactical precision of someone who had spent 7 years in situations where the wrong calculation meant people died. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the final act of this particular operation was about to begin, whether everyone involved was ready for it or not, because in approximately 2 hours, the truth would finally arrive, and when it did, everyone in this room would discover that their fundamental assumptions about power, about strength, about who actually posed a threat in this world, were about to be permanently, irrevocably shattered. But first, there was still one more confrontation to survive, one more escalation to endure, one more test of whether Lily Brennan could maintain her cover just long enough to complete the mission she'd been sent here to accomplish. The door opened. Dylan Garrett walked back in, and his expression suggested that whatever had happened in the past hour had not improved his mood. Behind him came Logan Pierce, Ronan Hayes, and someone Lily hadn't seen before. A master sergeant wearing combat action ribbon and Afghanistan campaign medal, his face carrying the particular hardness of someone who'd seen actual combat and come back changed by the experience. The third player, the one they'd been looking for. And from the way he looked at Lily, with immediate recognition and calculation, she knew that her cover wasn't just compromised anymore. It was about to completely detonate. The Master Sergeant's name tape read Torrance, and the way he moved through the bar suggested someone accustomed to command authority extending far beyond his actual rank. He was perhaps 42, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years in desert environments and the calculating eyes of someone who had learned to assess threats in fractions of seconds. He stopped 3 feet from the bar, studying Lily with an intensity that made everyone else's scrutiny seem amateur by comparison. You. His voice was low, controlled. I know you. Lily met his gaze without flinching, but her pulse had accelerated for the first time all evening. This was the variable they hadn't fully accounted for, the wild card that could unravel everything before they were ready. I don't think we've met, Master Sergeant. No, we haven't met, but I've seen your file, years ago, when I was going through selection for... He stopped, clearly reconsidering how much he wanted to say in front of witnesses. Doesn't matter. Point is, I know operator posture when I see it, and you've got it. Dylan had moved closer, emboldened by Torrance's apparent validation of his suspicions. See? I told you something was wrong with her. Shut up, Garrett. Torrance's command came without raising his voice, but Dylan flinched as if physically struck. The Master Sergeant's attention never left Lily. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you currently serving in any capacity with United States military or intelligence services? The question was precise, legal, and effectively cornered Lily into a position where lying would constitute a federal offense if later discovered. She held his gaze. I'm a civilian contractor employed by this facility to serve drinks. That's my current capacity. That's not an answer to my question. That's the only answer I'm authorized to give, Master Sergeant. The phrasing was deliberate, and Torrance caught it immediately. Authorized, interesting word choice. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Lily could hear. I did 3 rotations in Afghanistan, saw some operations that officially never happened, worked with people who officially didn't exist, and every single one of them had a look in their eyes. The look of someone who's been in the dark places doing the dark work. He paused. You've got that look. Maybe I just have tired eyes, Master Sergeant. It's been a long shift. And maybe I'm about to make a call to some old contacts who can confirm whether Captain. He stopped again, eyes narrowing. Brennan. That's your name, right? Lily Brennan? The use of Captain had been deliberate, a probe to see if she'd react to the rank. Lily's expression remained neutral, but Torrance smiled grimly. Thought so. There was a Captain Brennan in Delta selection files. Female. Exceptional scores. Disappeared into classified assignments around 2017. He pulled out his phone. I'm making a call. And if you are who I think you are, you're operating without proper notification to base command, which means you're either covert or rogue. Either way, this ends now. Okay, things are about to explode. If you're invested in this story, show some love with a like and listen. The next 5 minutes will answer every question you have about who Lily really is. But there's more. We have another story coming that's even more intense. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Lily's mind raced through calculations. Torrance making that call could compromise the entire operation. Dylan and his accomplices would scatter, evidence would disappear, and 6 weeks of undercover work would evaporate. But stopping him would require revealing herself prematurely before Ethan and the CID team were in position. She needed to buy time. Master Sergeant Torrance. Her voice had changed, subtle but unmistakable. The submission had vanished, replaced by quiet authority. Before you make that call, I strongly suggest you consider whether you want to be the person who compromised an active federal investigation into weapons trafficking on this installation. The bar went absolutely silent. Torrance's hand froze halfway to his ear. Weapons trafficking. 23 missing weapons systems over 8 weeks. M4 carbines, M67 grenades, PVS-14 night vision, interceptor body armor, estimated street value exceeding $2.3 million. Destination, black market sales to domestic militia groups and international criminal organizations. Lily's tone had gone flat, factual, the recitation of someone reading from an official report. The operation involves at least 3 active-duty Marines with armory access, delivery window scheduled for 0200 hours tonight, through the kitchen service entrance during security changeover protocols. She watched the information land, saw Torrance's expression shift from confrontational to calculating. You're CID, he said slowly. I'm someone trying to stop American weapons from ending up in terrorist hands, and you're about to decide whether you're going to help or hinder that objective. Dylan had gone pale, backing away from the bar with Ronan. Sapphire's phone had slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. Jasper stared at Lily with an expression somewhere between shock and dawning horror at his own behavior over the past weeks. Logan Pierce, interestingly, had gone completely still, his face unreadable, and that reaction told Lily more than any confession could have. Torrance lowered his phone slowly. If what you're saying is true, you should have notified base command. Proper channels exist for a reason. Proper channels get compromised when the conspiracy includes personnel with security clearance and internal access. Lily glanced meaningfully at Pierce, who had begun edging toward the exit. Proper channels become death traps when you can't be certain who's actually on which side. You're accusing an officer? Torrance's voice had hardened. I'm stating facts about operational security and complex investigations. If the lieutenant wants to interpret that as an accusation, he's welcome to stay here and explain why he feels personally targeted by general statements about investigative protocols. Pierce had stopped moving, trapped between leaving and appearing guilty, or staying and facing further scrutiny. His face had flushed red with anger and what might have been fear. This is absurd, he blustered, defaulting to authority when cornered. I don't have to listen to wild accusations from some civilian. Then leave, Lily interrupted. Walk out that door. Nobody's stopping you. Of course, when CID arrives in approximately, she glanced at the clock, 93 minutes, they'll have questions about why you departed so abruptly, and those questions will be followed by examination of your financial records, your communications logs, your duty rosters, and every single decision you've made regarding armory access and security protocols over the past 8 weeks. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Leave and look guilty. Stay and face exposure. Pierce was cornered, and everyone in the room could see it. Torrance had moved between the door and the other Marines, his body language shifting from confrontational to protective. Garrett, Hayes, Pierce, none of you are leaving this facility until this gets sorted out. You can't detain us, Dylan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. You don't have authority? I have 22 years of service and a duty to prevent theft of military equipment. That gives me authority to secure potential suspects until proper authorities arrive. Torrance looked at Lily, assuming proper authorities are actually coming. They're coming, Lily confirmed. They've been positioned since 2200 hours waiting for the transfer attempt, but since you've accelerated the timeline by confronting me, we're going to have to adjust the operation. She pulled out her phone, no longer bothering to hide it, and sent a rapid text message. Carl Weaver, who'd been watching the entire confrontation unfold, spoke for the first time. The inventory discrepancies. I reported them to CID 3 weeks ago. Nobody followed up. Someone followed up, Lily replied. Just not in the way you expected. Sometimes the follow-up is a bartender who listens to drunk Marines talking about shipment schedules. Sometimes it's 6 weeks of being treated like you're invisible while collecting evidence. Chloe Kim had stood, approaching the bar with slow deliberation. You're really military. I'm really trying to stop a crime, Lily deflected, still maintaining partial cover. Everything else is classified. The instructor at AIT, the one who taught advanced weapons techniques, that was you. Chloe's voice carried certainty now. I knew I recognized the method. You demonstrated that exact field strip procedure, 18 seconds. You said only special operations personnel could consistently achieve that time. Sounds like a smart instructor. She was. She told us that real warriors don't advertise their capabilities. They just do the work and let the results speak. Chloe smiled slightly. She also said that the most dangerous opponents are the ones everyone underestimates. The door burst open, and Ethan Brennan entered with 3 CID agents in full tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed at low-ready positions. His eyes swept the room, assessed the situation, landed on Lily with a mixture of relief and exasperation. You couldn't wait 90 minutes? He asked without preamble. Master Sergeant Torrance forced the timeline. Ethan's gaze shifted to Torrance, recognition flickering. Afghanistan, 2013. You were with 3rd Battalion during the Helmand operation. And you were the CID investigator who came through after the IED incident. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan. Torrance nodded slowly, pieces connecting in his mind. Brennan, you're related. Brother and sister, Ethan confirmed. And before you ask, yes, proper protocols were followed. Colonel Webb has been briefed since day 1. This operation was authorized at the highest levels precisely because we had indicators of officer involvement and needed someone with specialized skills to infiltrate without detection. He gestured to his team, who moved to secure Dylan, Ronan, and Pierce. The 3 suspects were read their rights with professional efficiency, their shocked protests falling on deaf ears as flex cuffs secured their wrists. You can't arrest me, Pierce kept repeating, his officer's authority evaporating under the reality of federal law enforcement. I'm a commissioned officer. I have rights. I demand to speak to my commander. Your commander is Colonel Webb, and he's waiting in the conference room to hear your explanation for why your financial records show $73,000 in deposits over the past 3 months from accounts linked to known arms dealers, Ethan replied with cold precision. You'll get your chance to talk, extensively, for hours. Sapphire had retreated to her corner booth, her earlier aggression replaced by visible calculation about her own exposure. Jasper stood frozen, his technical expertise useless in a situation that required entirely different skills. Ethan turned to Lily. Status? Torrance made positive ID based on selection files. Cover is completely compromised, but we've secured the primary suspects before the transfer attempt, so the mission objective is accomplished even if the methodology wasn't ideal. Colonel Webb wants a full briefing in 30 minutes. I'll be there. Lily glanced around the burr at the witnesses who had spent the evening watching her be humiliated, underestimated, and dismissed. But first, I think some explanations are owed to people who intervened when they didn't have to. She walked from behind the bar for the first time all evening, and without the physical barrier between herself and the room, her entire bearing shifted. The submissive curve of her shoulders straightened to parade rest. The uncertain, fearful posture transformed into the controlled readiness of someone comfortable with violence. The height difference was only 3 inches, but the psychological impact was dramatic. Old Otis, who'd returned at some point during the confrontation, raised his whiskey glass in silent salute. There she is, knew it all along. Lily approached Chloe first. You were right. Advanced infantry training, 2019. I was the guest instructor for the Advanced Weapons module. She extended her hand formally. Captain Lily Brennan, Delta Force, currently assigned to Ghost Unit 7 on Special Operations rotation. Chloe's eyes widened, but she shook the offered hand with firm confidence. You told us to trust our instincts, that obvious threats are rarely the real danger. And you demonstrated that lesson perfectly tonight. Thank you for intervening when Corporal Garrett grabbed me. You didn't have to, and it could have had career consequences. Some things matter more than career consequences, ma'am. Lily moved to Carl next. Your inventory reports were instrumental in building the case. The detailed logs, the pattern analysis, the timeline correlations. CID couldn't have constructed the prosecution without your documentation. Carl nodded slowly, processing. The questions I asked you about weapons systems, you were evaluating whether I was part of the conspiracy. Initially, yes. You were cleared within the first week. After that, you were a valuable, unknowing asset who kept meticulous records we could use as evidence. And the field strip demonstration? You were testing Garrett's reaction. I was forcing him to reveal his technical knowledge in front of witnesses. Someone with his limited training shouldn't have recognized instructor-level technique. His ability to identify it suggested exposure to advanced weapons handling, which correlated with the theft patterns. Lily's smile was grim. Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal is to make them demonstrate expertise they shouldn't possess. Jasper finally found his voice. I mocked you. I challenged you. I tried to humiliate you with weapons knowledge. His face had gone red with shame. And you're Delta Force. And you're a weapons instructor doing your job by maintaining standards and challenging people who might pose security risks. Your instincts were correct. I was hiding something. You just happened to be wrong about what I was hiding and why. Lily's tone softened slightly. For what it's worth, your technical knowledge is solid. The questions you asked were exactly the right questions. In another context, we'd probably have interesting conversations about weapon systems optimization. I don't deserve that courtesy, ma'am. You were doing what Marines are supposed to do, protecting your installation and your people. Misguided target, but correct instinct. I'll take that over people who see obvious warning signs and ignore them out of apathy. Master Sergeant Torrance had been watching the entire exchange with calculating assessment. Your cover was deep enough to fool standard background checks, but deliberately vulnerable to anyone with actual special operations exposure. You wanted to be discovered by the right people at the right time. It's a fine line, Lily acknowledged. Too shallow, and you get exposed too early. Too deep, and you can't build the rapport necessary to collect intelligence. The sweet spot is making people suspicious enough to investigate, but not certain enough to act until you're ready. And the humiliation, the harassment, that was calculated too. Bullies reveal themselves through their victims. I needed Dylan comfortable enough to discuss operational details in my presence. That required him to see me as beneath his notice, not worth his caution. Every insult, every dismissal, every degrading interaction made him more confident that I was exactly what I appeared to be, nobody important. Lily's expression hardened, and that confidence made him sloppy. Made him talk about timelines and shipments and security gaps where I could hear every word. When service members face legal challenges, especially charges as serious as assaulting a superior officer or weapons trafficking, they need specialized legal representation. Military defense attorneys who understand the Uniform Code of Military Justice, court-martial procedures, and command influence can mean the difference between career destruction and vindication. These legal experts handle everything from administrative separations to federal criminal charges, the kind of representation Dylan would desperately need in the coming hours. The CID agents had finished securing the suspects and were preparing to transport them to the base security facility for formal processing. Ethan approached Lily with a tablet displaying the evidence package they'd compiled. We've got communications intercepts, financial records, duty roster correlations, and witness testimony from 6 different sources. The case is airtight. JAG is recommending federal prosecution for all 3 suspects. Pierce's involvement goes deeper than just access provision, Lily observed. His financial deposits started 4 months before the thefts. He was planning this operation, recruiting assets, establishing protocols. Dylan and Ronan were just muscle. Agreed. FBI wants him for racketeering and conspiracy charges. They're also investigating whether he's connected to the larger network that's been acquiring military equipment across multiple installations. This might be bigger than just Camp Pendleton. The implications settled over the room like cold water. Not just 3 Marines stealing weapons for quick profit, but potentially a coordinated network exploiting security vulnerabilities at multiple bases, funneling American military hardware to whoever would pay. Torrance's expression had gone dangerous. If there's a network, if there are more installations compromised, we need a full review of security protocols across all bases. Already initiated, Ethan confirmed. CID has task forces deploying to 7 installations where similar theft patterns have been identified. This operation was the proof of concept that the investigation methodology works. He looked at Lily with obvious pride beneath the professional demeanor. 6 weeks undercover, 0 cover breaks until tonight, comprehensive evidence collection, and successful interdiction before weapons left the installation. It's going to be the training case study for the next generation of investigators. It's also going to be a painful reminder of how easily people dismiss threats that don't match their preconceptions, Lily replied. Dylan grabbed me, physically assaulted a superior officer in front of 47 witnesses, and nobody except Chloe intervened because they all assumed the bartender wasn't worth defending. The observation landed with uncomfortable weight. Around the room, the remaining Marines shifted, confronting their own complicity and allowing the harassment to continue unchallenged. Old Otis spoke into the silence. That's the thing about underestimation. It cuts both ways. You underestimated her, which is what she needed, but you also underestimated yourselves. Assumed you couldn't make a difference, that it wasn't your place to intervene, that authority figures would handle it. He finished his whiskey. A lot of evil happens in the world because good people decide it's not their problem. The door opened again, and Colonel Hector Webb entered in full dress uniform, his 48 years and 2 decades of command presence filling the space with immediate authority. Every Marine in the room snapped to attention reflexively, even the CID agents. Webb's gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail before settling on Lily. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and anyone watching could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, evaluating the operation, the results, the methodology, the costs and benefits of the approach they'd taken. Then he came to attention himself and rendered a full military salute. Captain Brennan, on behalf of this installation and the United States Marine Corps, thank you for your service and your successful completion of this operation. The formality of the salute, the public acknowledgement from the base commander, transformed the atmosphere completely. This wasn't a civilian bartender being patronized. This was a superior officer receiving recognition from a colleague who understood exactly what her mission had required. Lily returned the salute with precision. Sir, the mission was successful due to excellent support from CID, comprehensive planning from JSOC, and critical assistance from base personnel who maintained security protocols despite not understanding the full operational picture. Nevertheless, the burden of maintaining cover under sustained harassment fell on you. I'm told Corporal Garrett physically assaulted you earlier this evening. He did, sir, in front of multiple witnesses, which ultimately served the investigation's purposes. Served the investigation, perhaps, but still constitutes assault on a superior officer, which will be added to the charges he's already facing. Webb's expression was granted. I want to be absolutely clear to everyone in this room. Captain Brennan's cover necessitated that she endure treatment that would never be acceptable under any other circumstances. The harassment she experienced was not justified by her apparent civilian status. It was not acceptable behavior regardless of rank or position. And the fact that it served our investigative purposes does not excuse the underlying conduct. He turned to address the broader room. Over the coming weeks, this installation will be implementing comprehensive training on recognizing and responding to harassment. We will be reviewing our cultural standards regarding how civilian personnel are treated, and we will be having difficult conversations about the assumptions we make based on someone's appearance, gender, or job title. The speech was clearly intended to preempt any narrative that Lily's undercover role somehow validated the harassment. Webb understood optics, understood that without clear framing, the story could become female officer tricks Marines, instead of installation successfully interdicts weapons trafficking. Sapphire had been watching from her corner booth, and she finally approached with obvious reluctance. Captain Brennan, ma'am, I owe you an apology. For what, specifically? Lily's tone was neutral, neither hostile nor welcoming. For all of it. The mockery, the social exclusion, the recording, the background check threats. Sapphire stopped, struggling with the admission. I was threatened by you, even when I thought you were just a bartender. Something about you made me feel like I needed to establish dominance, needed to prove I was superior, and I took that insecurity out on you in cruel ways. Thank you for acknowledging that. Lily paused, considering. For what it's worth, your instincts weren't entirely wrong. You sensed I didn't fit the expected pattern. You recognized threat indicators. The problem wasn't your perception, it was how you responded to it. Threat assessment should lead to investigation and appropriate response, not social cruelty and harassment. Is there any way I can make it right? Lily shook her head. Not with me. My mission is complete, and I'll be leaving this installation. But you can make it right with every other woman, every other person you encounter who doesn't fit your expectations of how they should look or act or carry themselves. You can choose to respond with curiosity instead of cruelty, with investigation instead of dismissal, with dignity instead of degradation. Sapphire nodded, her face reflecting genuine discomfort with her own recent behavior. I'll do that, ma'am. If that reveal gave you chills, hit the like button. But the story's not over. We need to see the consequences. And when this ends, we've got another video ready about a Navy SEAL who walked into a police station and changed everything. Click the notification bell so it's waiting for you. The clock showed 0100 hours, 1 a.m. The bar had transformed from entertainment venue to crime scene, with CID agents photographing angles, documenting witness statements, and preserving evidence for the upcoming prosecutions. Ethan pulled Lily aside for a private conversation. Webb wants you back at JSOC. Your next assignment starts in 4 weeks. Hostage rescue planning in Syria. Female operative required for cultural access. Syria. Lily's expression was unreadable. What's the brief? Classified until you accept the assignment, but it's connected to Operation Ghost Protocol, which I know you have history with. They specifically requested you. The mention of Ghost Protocol triggered memories Lily had spent years managing. Benghazi connections, classified operations, teammates who hadn't made it home, the kind of missions that appeared in official records as training exercises, while the actual details remained locked in vaults that wouldn't open for 50 years. How many hostages? 4 confirmed, possibly 6. American contractors caught in factional fighting. Syrian government can't help, because officially acknowledging their presence would be politically complicated. Russian forces are too close for conventional rescue. It needs to be quiet, fast, and executed by someone who can navigate local culture without raising alarms. Which means female operative who speaks Arabic and has experience with hostile extraction under complex political constraints. Which means you, Ethan confirmed, but Webb also said this one's voluntary. You've been undercover for 6 weeks, you've successfully completed a federal investigation, and you've earned rest if you want it. Nobody would fault you for declining. Lily looked around the bar, at the Marines who'd dismissed her, the few who'd defended her, the suspects being led away in restraints. She thought about the weapons they had recovered, the lives potentially saved by preventing military hardware from reaching terrorist organizations or domestic extremists. She thought about the female Marines like Chloe who needed to see women in positions of operational authority, needed to know that gender wasn't an insurmountable barrier to serving in the most demanding roles the military offered. She thought about the mission in Syria, about hostages waiting for rescue, about the specialized skills she'd spent 7 years developing specifically for situations where conventional approaches failed. Tell JSOC I'll take the brief, she said quietly, but I want to handpick my team, and I want authorization to recruit from outside traditional special operations pipelines. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Outside traditional pipelines? I watched Chloe Kim tonight. She saw what everyone else missed, intervened when nobody else would, and demonstrated tactical thinking beyond her rank or experience level. There are women like her throughout the military who never get considered for special operations because they don't fit the standard profile. Lily's voice carried absolute conviction. If I'm building a team for complex operations requiring cultural navigation and unconventional approaches, I want the authority to identify and recruit talent wherever I find it. That's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. Good thing I just spent 6 weeks demonstrating that unconventional approaches yield results that conventional methodology misses. Ethan grinned. I'll pass the request up the chain. Fair warning, though, you're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable questioning established selection protocols. Then they'll be uncomfortable. Results matter more than comfort. Colonel Webb approached, overhearing the end of the conversation. Captain Brennan, a word? They moved to a quieter corner of the bar while the CID team continued their documentation. Webb's expression had softened from command authority to something more personal. I knew your father, he said without preamble. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan, Delta Force, killed in action in Afghanistan in 2010. Lily's spine straightened. Yes, sir, I know. He was my teammate before he made officer. We went through selection together. He was one of the finest warriors I ever served with, and when he died closing on a Taliban position to protect his team, it broke something in all of us. Webb paused. I pulled your file when JSOC briefed me on this operation. You've exceeded every metric your father set. 3 Purple Hearts to his 2. Silver Star, Combat Action Ribbon with 3 stars, 7 years of continuous deployment rotation, and tonight you demonstrated the same quality that defined him, willingness to endure personal costs to accomplish the mission. Thank you, sir. But here's what I want you to understand, Captain. Your father's willingness to endure cost eventually killed him. Not because he wasn't skilled or prepared, but because there's a limit to how much any person can sustain. Webb's tone was gentle but firm. You're being offered the Syria mission. You're also being offered rest. And I'm telling you, as someone who watched your father burn himself out in service to ideals that didn't reciprocate his loyalty, that rest isn't weakness, it's tactical necessity. The observation hung between them, heavy with implications about sustainability, about the long-term costs of perpetual deployment, about whether a life spent entirely in service to mission left room for anything resembling actual living. I'll consider that, sir. Do more than consider it. Talk to someone. Doctor. Price, your brother, someone who can give you perspective beyond the next operational objective. Webb's hand briefly touched her shoulder. You're an exceptional operator, Captain, but operators who never rest eventually break. And I'd rather have you healthy and effective for a long career than burned out and destroyed in the next 3 years. He departed, leaving Lily alone with thoughts that were significantly more complicated than the tactical calculations she preferred. The bar was emptying now. The suspects had been transported to holding facilities. The witnesses had provided statements and been released. The CID team was packing up their equipment, preparing to transfer to the base security office where the detailed interrogations would begin. Chloe approached one final time, her expression uncertain but determined. Ma'am, you mentioned recruiting outside traditional pipelines. If you're serious about that, I'd like to be considered. You're 24. You've been in the Marines for less than 3 years. You have no special operations experience. No, ma'am, but I have something else. I'm willing to learn. I recognize situations that require intervention even when it's uncomfortable. And I understand that real strength sometimes means being underestimated until the moment you're not. Chloe met Lily's eyes without flinching. You taught us at AIT that the best operators are the ones everyone overlooks. I'd like the chance to prove I'm one of those people. Lily studied the younger Marine, seeing echoes of her own determination at that age, the hunger to prove herself in environments designed to exclude her, the conviction that gender was irrelevant to capability if given the opportunity to demonstrate competence. Selection for special operations is brutal, she said carefully. 70% attrition rate, physical standards that most men can't meet, psychological pressure designed to break you. And even if you make it through, you'll face skepticism and resistance from people convinced women don't belong in combat roles. With respect, ma'am, I face skepticism and resistance now. Might as well face it while doing something that actually matters. A smile flickered across Lily's face. Write a letter explaining why you want to be considered. Include your training scores, your supervisor's evaluations, and a detailed account of your tactical decision-making process tonight. Send it to me through Colonel Webb's office. I can't promise anything, but I'll review it. Thank you, ma'am. Chloe's entire demeanor had brightened with hope. I won't waste the opportunity. She departed, leaving Lily alone in the now empty bar. The jukebox had finally gone silent. The pool table stood abandoned. The overhead lights hummed their 60-cycle drone into space that suddenly felt vast and lonely, despite the recent crowd. Lily walked behind the bar one last time, looking at the space where she'd spent 6 weeks being dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. She picked up a glass and wiped it clean with practiced motions, completing the ritual, even though nobody was watching, because discipline mattered even when it served no tactical purpose. The door opened, and Ivy Rodriguez entered, still in her combat medic uniform from the late shift at the base hospital. "Heard there was excitement," Ivy said, settling onto a bar stool. "Thought I'd missed everything." "Just clean up at this point. The arrests happened about 90 minutes ago. So the rumor is true, you're Delta Force. Ghost Unit 7, technically. Delta Force with additional classification for operations that officially don't exist." Ivy laughed softly. "I knew it. The way you handled that glass earlier, that was advanced trauma life support technique for sharp debris management. I taught that course at Combat Medic School for 3 years. You were one of my students." "Fort Sam Houston, 2015. Advanced Tactical Medicine Module. You taught us how to perform emergency procedures under fire. And you were the best student in that cohort. Top scores in every practical evaluation. I recommended you for Level 3 trauma certification, which is usually restricted to physicians." Ivy's smile was genuine, warm. "Good to see you're still putting those skills to use, even if your current work involves infiltrating bars instead of treating casualties. Sometimes infiltrating bars prevents casualties. 23 weapons off the black market means potentially hundreds of lives saved." "True enough." Ivy paused, her expression growing more serious. "I watched tonight. The way Garrett and his friends treated you. The systematic degradation, the casual cruelty. That was hard to witness. It was necessary for the mission. Necessary, maybe, but still corrosive. That kind of treatment leaves marks even when you are trained to endure it." Ivy leaned forward. "I work with PTSD cases. I know the signs of accumulated trauma. And I'm telling you, as someone who has watched combat veterans struggle with the invisible wounds, that you should talk to someone before deploying to Syria. The Syria mission." Multiple people had now mentioned it, which meant either Ethan was less discreet than he thought, or the military gossip network was functioning at peak efficiency. "I'll consider it," Lily said, using the same deflection she'd given Colonel Webb. "Don't just consider it, actually do it. The warriors who refuse to acknowledge psychological impact are the ones who eventually break catastrophically." Ivy's tone carried the authority of someone who had seen too many breakdowns. "Dr. Price is excellent. She specializes in special operations personnel. She understands the unique stressors and has clearance for classified discussions." "I'll think about it." Ivy stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Your father was one of my patients. After his 3rd deployment, before he went back to Afghanistan, he came to me with shoulder pain that turned out to be stress-related muscle tension. We talked for 2 hours about deployment cycles and sustainable service." Her voice had gone quiet, heavy with old grief. "He told me he knew he was burning out, but couldn't see a path to stopping that didn't feel like quitting. 6 months later, he was dead. And I've always wondered if that conversation had been different, if I'd pushed harder for him to take rest, whether he'd still be alive." The admission hung in the air between them, a confession of guilt that neither woman had authority to absolve. "It wasn't your responsibility to save him from himself," Lily said finally. "Maybe not, but it's my responsibility to say the same things to you that I wish I'd said more forcefully to him. You're exceptional, Keaton, but exceptional people are still people, still breakable, still mortal." Ivy met Lily's eyes. "Don't let your competence convince you that you're invincible. That's how we lose the best warriors." She departed, leaving Lily alone with thoughts that refused to stay tactical, that kept drifting into territory she normally avoided. Questions about sustainability, about cost, about whether a life spent entirely in service to mission left room for anything else. Her phone buzzed, a message from JSOC. "Syria brief scheduled for 0800 hours Monday. 4 American contractors, 6 days in captivity. Russian forces 18 kilometers from extraction point. Time-sensitive operation requiring immediate planning phase." Another message, this one from Colonel Webb. "Take the weekend. That's an order, not a suggestion. Report Monday rested or don't report at all." A third message from Ethan. "Dad would be proud. Also, he'd tell you to take Webb's advice. Love you, sis." Lily set down the phone and looked around the empty bar one final time. Somewhere out there, Dylan Garrett was in a holding cell, contemplating federal charges and dishonorable discharge. Logan Pierce was realizing that his officer's commission couldn't protect him from the consequences of betraying his oath. Ronan Hayes was probably crying, overwhelmed by the reality that had replaced his vague criminal fantasies. Somewhere else, 4 American contractors waited in Syrian captivity, hoping rescue would come before their captors' patience expired, or geopolitical circumstances made their survival inconvenient to whatever factional alliance currently held them. Somewhere beyond that, women like Chloe Kim were watching this story spread through the base gossip network, learning that underestimation could be a weapon, that unconventional approaches yielded unconventional results, that gender was irrelevant to capability when given the opportunity to demonstrate competence. And here, in an empty bar in California, Lily Brennan stood behind a counter where she'd spent 6 weeks being treated as invisible, recognizing that invisibility had been the point, that sometimes the most powerful position was the one nobody acknowledged. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked out into the California night. The base was quiet at this hour, most personnel asleep in preparation for Saturday morning routines. Overhead, stars competed with light pollution from the installation. In the distance, the Pacific Ocean whispered against the shoreline with rhythmic persistence. Lily pulled out her phone one more time and composed a message to Dr. Martha Price. Available for session this weekend, need to process some things before Monday briefing. The response came within minutes. Saturday, 10 a.m., my office. Glad you're taking this seriously. Another message to Chloe Kim. Letter received, initial review promising. Formal recommendation process begins Monday. Prepare for challenging questions. A final message to Ethan. Thanks for backup tonight. See you Sunday for that conversation we've been avoiding about sustainability and whether we're replicating Dad's patterns. Then she pocketed the phone and walked toward the temporary officer housing, leaving behind the bar, the mission, the 6 weeks of calculated submission, and stepping into the uncertain space between operations where real life supposedly happened for people who remembered how to live it. The story of the bartender who shocked the base would spread. Dylan's arrest would become a cautionary tale about underestimating opponents. The weapons trafficking case would be studied in CID training courses for years. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was happening in the quiet moments nobody would witness or discuss. A warrior choosing to acknowledge her own humanity, to recognize that strength included knowing when to rest, to accept that exceptional capability didn't require perpetual deployment, because the missions would always be there. Syria today, somewhere else tomorrow, an endless rotation of operations requiring specialized skills and willingness to endure extraordinary costs. The question that kept surfacing, the one Lily had been avoiding for 7 years of continuous service, was whether she would be there to execute them. Whether the pattern of her father's self-destruction through relentless deployment was destiny or warning. Whether exceptional people were actually breakable, after all. She didn't have answers yet. But for the first time in years, she was willing to ask the questions. And that small shift, that tiny acknowledgement of limitation, felt more dangerous and more necessary than any tactical operation she'd ever executed. The weekend stretched ahead, offering time to process, to rest, to prepare for Monday's Syria briefing with something approaching sustainable readiness instead of exhausted determination. And on Monday, when JSOC presented the mission brief, when Chloe Kim's letter arrived for formal review, when the consequences of tonight's operation rippled through the installation and beyond, Lily Brennan would face those challenges with the same competence that had characterized her entire career. But she'd face them having acknowledged that competence alone wasn't enough, that sustainability mattered, that exceptional warriors who ignored their own limitations eventually broke, that even people trained to endure anything had breaking points that deserved respect. The California night embraced her as she walked, the base settling into the peaceful routine of hours between evening chaos and morning formation. Somewhere in that darkness, other warriors struggled with similar questions about cost and purpose, and whether the mission justified the toll. Lily didn't have answers for them, any more than she had answers for herself. But she had the Syria brief on Monday. She had Dr. Price's office on Saturday. She had her brother's support, and Colonel Webb's orders to rest, and Chloe Kim's letter waiting for review. She had the next mission, and the space to prepare for it properly. And for now, in this particular moment, that was enough. The story of the bartender who shocked everyone would become legend. But the real story, the one that actually mattered, was the warrior choosing to be human, choosing sustainability over self-destruction, choosing to acknowledge limitation as strength rather than weakness. That story wouldn't make the gossip networks or the training case studies, but it would determine whether Captain Lily Brennan had a long career or a short tragedy. And as she entered her quarters, secured her weapon, and finally allowed herself to drop the operational discipline that had sustained her through 6 weeks of undercover work, Lily chose the harder path. Not the mission at all costs, but the mission sustained by wisdom about costs worth paying and costs that would eventually destroy you. Her father had chosen differently, had burned himself out in service to ideals that hadn't reciprocated his loyalty, had died closing on enemy positions because he'd forgotten that survival mattered too. Lily would honor his memory, not by replicating his patterns, but by learning from his mistakes. She would execute the Syria mission. She would build the team. She would continue serving in roles that required exceptional capability and willingness to endure extraordinary circumstances. But she would do it sustainably, with rest, with psychological support, with acknowledgement that even exceptional people needed care. The bartender had completed her mission. Now the warrior had to learn to live between missions. And that challenge, invisible to everyone who'd watched tonight's drama unfold, would prove far more difficult than any tactical operation. But Lily Brennan had 7 years of experience doing difficult things. Time to add one more to the list.